Hello, I'm Robert Holmberg, and this is a presentation of Science Outreach Athabasca. It's on biting flies, vampires of the north, and this is part 3 of 4. And in this presentation, we'll be talking about other biting flies. So in part 1, we talked about what are biting flies, why are they important. Part 2 is all about mosquitoes. This is part 3, where we're going to talk about this group, and part 4, we're going to talk about avoiding bites and killing biting flies. So the second group we're looking at are the black flies, the Simulidae. There's a photograph on the left of one feeding, and on the right is an enlarged drawing of what they look like. So here's a scanning electron micrograph of the head of a black fly. So they're quite small, only 3 to 5 millimeters. They're dark colored, but we call them black flies, but they're dark. They can be gray, browns colors as well. And they tend to have this hump back in the large prothorax, and their larvae are found only in flowing water. So they're not in lakes and ponds, only in streams. And just a cartoon about Black Fly Day sale versus Black Friday sale. Okay, the good news, again, far less than half of black flies are after your blood because, again, only females bite and they're fairly host specific. So they usually feed in the mornings and in the late afternoon. So they're not around at night and they're not around when it's really cold. And they also do not enter buildings, which is a good thing. So the bad news is the females get above your socks and under your sleeves to feed, and there's no immediate pain, but the bites bleed significantly because they've got a great anesthetic and great anticoagulants. So often the first time you know you're bitten is that you see some blood and you're saying, where does this come from? But the bites then become itchy um, and so they're not very nice. Okay, the bad news continued is there in Alberta where I live, there's more than 54 species, a whole pile of genera. So there's lots of different kinds of them. Now, more bad news is the Athabasca area where I live has a history of many cattle deaths. And at one time it was known for the um, um, more deaths of cattle from black flies than any other place in the world. And the calves die because of allergic reactions to thousands and thousands of bites. And then the underbellies of cattle are affected. So the udders of females and the scrotums of males can be bloody and sore and get secondary infections. Well, here's the life cycle. So there's the humpback black fly at the top. It lays its eggs on plants over top of water. The eggs hatch out and the larvae drop into the water. They they attach themselves to the substrate, whether it be rocks or plant materials, and they're filter feeders. And then they pupate, and this pupa floats to the surface and the adult floats to the surface and emerges and starts the life cycle again. So this is what a larva looks like, as again, they're only in running water. They're filter feeders with those fans at the head end, and they have 7 instars or 7 segments of time where they molt in these larval stages. Now, the third group we're going to talk about is the no-see-ums, or the Ceratopogonidae, or ceratopogonids, if you wish. They're also quite humpbacked, with the prothorax being quite large, the colored diagram on the left, and then there's the black and white diagram on the right. And there's lots of common English names for this group of flies. So they can be called biting midges, but so can mosquitoes. I like using no-see-ums, even though it's can be spelt in various ways. They're punkies and sand gnats, sand fleas, sand flies, granny nippers, and cheek drum. But uh, so it's difficult to say in various parts of the English-speaking world of what you're actually talking about. So one of the characteristics is that they're even smaller than black flies, less than 3 millimeters, and they rest with their wings overlapping, like in this diagram, unlike the black flies where the wings stick out to the sides. And they're also dark colored, and the larvae and adults are only found in moist areas. So here's a male. I'll go back, I went too fast. You can see the large antenna. Just like in mosquitoes, the males have a larger antenna in order to find the females. And these are the ones that will feed on other insects, and they can even be predation on small insects. This one is feeding on a crane fly. Okay, the good news, only the females bite again, and not all species go after humans. And they usually only bite in crepuscular times at dawn and dusk, and they do not fly far. So one of the benefits of knowing this is that if you have a lot of no-see-um bites, is you move a few meters away to a drier area and you can usually avoid them. The bad news, the bites are very painful. Even though a very small bite, they're very painful because they don't have good anesthetic. And some species can transmit blue tongue disease in cattle and sheep. In the province of Alberta, there's more than 10 species, and in these various possible genera. So they're not well studied, and we really don't know their distribution too well. This is what the larvae look like. Some of they're all very elongate, and some of them can have some hairs, and some of them can be virtually naked and look like segmented worms. Now we'll move on to the fourth group of biting flies, the horse flies, the family Tabanidae. And here's a photograph to show that tabanids are big biting flies. So there's a black fly, the simulid up at the top, the tabanid in the middle, and the culicid or mosquito in the bottom. Okay, the good news, again, only the females bite, and not all species bite humans, and they're only active when it's sunny and warm. Now, one of the characteristics of tabanids, they have very colorful eyes, like this deer fly. Now, the bad news is that bites are painful because of the large stylets and the poor anesthetics. So they don't take a chunk of skin out of you when they bite. They just make bigger holes. And there are over 4,000 species in the world, 144 in Canada, and more than 48 in Alberta. And locally in Alberta, they may transmit some livestock diseases. Again, the research is not done to be able to prove this decisively. Here's again a scanning electron microscope a view of a horsefly head, and it's artificially colored. But here's the palp on the top left, which is a sensory organ, and the sheath that contains the stylets. And those are the stylets that are big and make the penetration into the skin and cause the pain. So in Alberta, there's 6 different genera and various species of each of them. And now there's an online guide that you can get on the internet to look for identification. So this is a female, and the arrow points to the space between the two large compound eyes. There are also three simple eyes or ocelli in that space, but there is a fairly large gap between the compound eyes. This is a male, and you can see that there's very little gap or none between the compound eyes. And you very, very seldom see the males because they're not interested in you. And unless you go look for them, you won't see them. So the deer flies are a group of pattern winged tabanids. So they're in the family Tabanidae, but they're smaller and they have those pattern wings. The life cycle, again, the adult lays its eggs also on plants above water or moist soil. The eggs hatch, go down into water or moist soil. But they feed as larval stages, and then they pupate, and you get the life cycle continued. Here's a photograph of a female laying the eggs on a leaf. Here's the egg case. There's many eggs in that case, and they often darken up after they're laid. And here's a picture of an aquatic larva, and they're predaceous on invertebrates in streams and in wetlands. They have 6 to 13 instars, or stages within the larval stage. Now we move on to the fifth group, the snipe flies, and they're quite slender with stilt-like legs. A photograph on the top, drawing on the bottom. Their larvae are aquatic to terrestrial. They've got more than 10 species in Canada, so they're not as diverse as the other groups we've covered. In Alberta, they're primarily found in the mountain regions. Now we move on to the sixth group, the musket flies. And the good news that there's many, many, many species of musket flies. But in Alberta, there's only 2 species that only occasionally bite humans. The bad news is both females and males bite. And both species are livestock pests, but can occur in natural areas as well. And they can transmit diseases. So here's the musket fly life cycle. So the adult lays eggs, the eggs hatch into this maggot form. It feeds usually terrestrially, and then it forms a pupal case, and then the pupa emerges into the adult. So the one species that we have is the stable fly, which is this one, 6 to 8 millimeters. It was originally from Eurasia, but with the importation of cattle, it's become worldwide in its distribution. And the larvae feed on decaying vegetation, like in manure piles, but also along shorelines. And the second species of musket fly that we have that occasionally bite humans is the horn fly. And these larvae feed on fresh cow dung. Now, there's other flies that feed on blood that I haven't covered in this talk. So we've got the water snipe flies, the blow flies, the frog-biting midges, the tsetse flies of Africa, the louse fly, which is shown on the bottom right, and it doesn't have any wings, and the cheese skippers and drain flies. So there's several other groups. So blood feeding has evolved several times in the diptera. Okay, this is the end of part 3. If you found this useful, you can look at part 4, and we'll talk about avoiding bites and killing biting flies. Thank you again.